Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and good afternoon. This has been one of our more popular sessions online. Very passionate community out there that want more information. So here we are, creating an LGBT family, legal, emotional, and financial planning, brought to us by our friends at EMD Serrano. We're very thankful to them, and we welcome you and our fabulous panel, led by moderator Ken Mosesian from the American Fertility Association. Or no, sorry.
Yes.
I just did it right, and I thought I did it wrong. Okay. Anyway, Ken, handing it over to you.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here today. It's my pleasure to moderate this panel today for a couple of reasons. As a gay man, this is a particular interest to me. As the executive director of the American Fertility Association and the inclusive stance that we've taken around family building, my interest in it is heightened. And I'm also really privileged to be joined by three extraordinary people who I'm sure can answer any questions that you have about creating your family today. Let me tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'll introduce our panelists and we'll get going. When we conclude that portion of the session, we will be taking questions from the audience, so I just ask that if you have a question, jot it down, hold it until that time. We'll make sure that those questions get answered, and after that we'll be taking questions that have come through Twitter and social media. So I am the executive director of the American Fertility Association. I began this job in November of 2008, and I have a long history of involvement with nonprofit and for-profit organizations and building coalitions between them, because I think that working together with our for-profit brethren, if you will, we have an opportunity to do a lot more than we could alone. And certainly the corporate partners that the American Fertility Association have made it possible for us to expand our work in ways that we never would have been able to before. When I first began my work with the Fertility Association, I was asked why I would be interested in doing that. I'm a gay man. My partner Bob and I will have been together 19 years coming up in March, and we don't have any children, but I'm passionate about family, and so is the American Fertility Association. We're passionate about family, and we're passionate about family in all of its diversity, and that's why we've taken a stand for equality, both in family building and in marriage. There are two things that I'd like you to remember as we jump into this today. The first is that if you're considering creating your family, one of the most important things you can do is educate yourself in advance about all of the different issues surrounding family building. Psychological issues, the legal issues, and the medical issues. It's no mistake that we have a physician, an attorney, and a clinical psychologist here today. This really is the team that you need to move forward, because as we read all too often in the media, there are a lot of things that can go wrong for people who are unprepared. And so the extent to which you educate and prepare yourself as you begin this journey, the extent to which you create a powerful team to work with you on the journey, I think is the extent to which you'll have success. So I really strongly recommend that you do that. The second thing is to remember that this is, in fact, a journey, and that it sometimes takes turns that you don't expect. But if you've got a powerful team built, and if you're well educated as you step into it, then I think you're going to have an amazing experience. So with that, let me introduce the folks that we have here today. Starting down on the end, Dr. Guy Ringler, a reproductive endocrinologist, a partner at California Fertility Partners, and a member of the American Fertility Association Board of Directors. Dr. Kim Bergman, a clinical psychologist and the co-owner of Growing Generations. And Andy Vorsimer, the owner of Egg Donation, Inc., and an attorney. And Kim, I'm going to begin with you. From a psychological perspective, when you're first dealing with people in the LGBT community who are coming to you and expressing a desire to create family, what are some of the most important considerations that you engage them in when you first talk with them?
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. Excuse my froggy voice. Like most of us, have recovered at the tail end of being sick. So when you, unlike a heterosexual couple who just decides to go get pregnant and have a baby, as most of you already know, I'm sure, and many of you may have experienced already, there are many intentional things that we as LGBT families have to do. I'm a lesbian mom. My partner, my wife, and I have been together, it will be 30 years this year. And we have I know, we have a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old, both conceived through donor insemination with an anonymous sperm donor, same donor. I carried one, my wife carried the other. And since my daughter's 17, you can imagine that at the time that we were doing it, there wasn't the plethora of information that there is now. So we were just kind of winging it. Fortunately, I think we did a lot of things right, but some of it was accidental. So there's a couple of different things that you need to consider, or categories of things. One is how are we going to have our family? Are we going to adopt? Are we going to use a donor insemination? Are we going to use a known donor, an anonymous donor? Are we going to need an egg donor? Are we using a surrogate? Do we have people who can help us with that? Are we going to an agency? So there's many decisions and choices that need to be made. And most of us will start, as low tech as possible, and then kind of work our way up the chain. And Dr. Ringler's going to talk about the medical aspect of this in a bit. But some of the decisions are going to be obvious and some of them are not. One of the things that we all as couples have to deal with is who's going to go first. Which one of you is going to carry the first baby, or in the case of two men, which one of us is going to use our sperm? And now, there are technologies that allow you to do both people's sperm, or there's this really cool thing that wasn't available when my wife and I had our kids, which is partner-to-partner IVF. So the egg from one partner is put in the other partner. So there's a lot of different means to the end. Adoption is much more accessible, especially in California, for gay and lesbian couples. So there's the whole category of how to, and it's kind of, I've sort of touched on a lot of the how to. I'm not going to go into too much more detail because there's actually a lot of information out there on the how to. I'm going to talk a little bit about the other thing that we need to deal with when we're starting a family as a gay or lesbian couple or individual, and that is, so there's how to become a parent, and then there's how to create a healthy family. And being an LGBT family really isn't all that unique. You'll find once you have kids, you have way more in common with the other soccer moms than with your other lesbian non-mom friends or gay dads and all of that. But there are some unique psychological issues that we have to deal with. The most obvious one is that for most of us, when we came out in our late teens or 20s or whenever you came out, you got to choose, sort of once you come out, as you know, coming out is a multi-level process, but you can kind of choose when not to come out too, when you're just a person. But when you have a kid, you kind of give up that right or that freedom or that ability to hide. And so, for example, I'd be in the grocery store with my daughter, who's, when she was 3, let's say, and she has these big green eyes and I don't. And, the checkout person would say something like, oh, your daddy must have beautiful green eyes. And she would say, nope, but my sperm donor does. I don't have a daddy. I have 2 mommies. So you're going to be outed a lot. But the good news is that kids are so amazingly, wonderfully innocent. They really have no idea that there's a world out there that doesn't accept them. So that's sort of the second piece that's really important, how to create a healthy LGBT family. So there's issues of disclosure, who you're going to tell, how do you tell them. There's issues of labeling, you know, who are we? Are we mommy and mama? Are we going to let the kid figure that out? And then there's also having to really be a bold expression of yourself. And I really think that as LGBT parents, when we become parents, we also become constant consciousness raisers. Because the way to raise a healthy child in an LGBT family is pretty much the way to raise a healthy family in a child in any family, which is with honesty and authenticity from the beginning. So it's figuring out how you're going to tell your story, what's your story, and telling it from the very beginning. A lot of times people will ask me, you know, how do we tell our kids that we're gay, or how do we talk about our particular family? And what they're really saying, that they don't realize they're saying, is, can you help me overcome the very last vestige of internalized homophobia that I still have, so that I can get that out of the way, and then I can be completely open and authentic and know exactly how to talk to my kids? Because, you know, it's sort of like with anything else. It's very personal. There's no right or wrong way, except, I would say, early and honestly. But aside from that, there's no right or wrong way. But it's just like any other thing that kids might ask about, like sex, or, you know, they hear some scary news story about guns, and, you know, they'll ask you questions, and you kind of choose developmentally appropriate ways to explain to them things that are somewhat outside their grasp. But when kids want to know where they came from, and they want to know early, and they want to know constantly, and they want the stories over and over and over again. So the only thing that stops us as LGBT parents from telling the story freely and openly, both to our children and to other people, is that last little kernel that we can't really help, because we live in a heterosexist world. So it's not our fault, and no matter how evolved you are, even if you're an activist like myself, you still will sometimes trip over yourself and find you're a little bit uncomfortable. And what that is, you know, that internalized homophobia is really about, the question really is it really okay for gay people to have kids? Like, at the end of the day, I know I want to, but, you know, at the end of the day, am I doing a disservice to my kids by having them have two moms, or by having them be in this gay family? Are people going to make fun of them, and like all that stuff? And there is a huge body of research, supporting the fact that kids of gay and lesbian parents turn out just as good. Actually in some areas better. They tend to be more open-minded and more willing to look at lots of different options, not surprising. But there's no research that's actually sound scientific research that has ever found that the kids of LGBT parents don't do as well.
Thank you. I was just going to ask you, too, if you're dealing with a couple where one of them has a stronger desire to have children than another one does. How do you approach that situation?
That's tricky, because you really do have to kind of get on the same page. I mean, here's how I approached it personally. I was ready to have kids about 10 years ahead of my wife, and we waited. And we probably had kids a few years before she was ready, and about 10 years after I was already ready. But she was far enough along that it worked. I've counseled many couples that are in that position, and especially in the LGBT community, because you don't necessarily, because you kind of, when you come out, most of us give up the idea that we're going to have kids. Although I'm happy to report that the younger generation of LGBT kids, young people, are absolutely not thinking they're going to miss out on that, which I credit all of us, this whole fertility community, because it seems very second nature to them that they are going to have kids. But for many of us, when we come out, we give up the idea that we're going to have kids, and then we kind of put it in a pocket somewhere far, far, far away. And so our evolution back to parenthood may be at different levels from our partner. So, you know, a lot of communication. There have been relationships that have broken up over this issue, because if you really, really, really want to have kids, for any of you, I assume you in this audience are here because you really, really, really want to have kids, you know that it's pretty much going to break your heart not to fulfill that. So, I mean, I think it is a lot of communication, a good therapist. You know, there really are a lot of good therapists in most big cities who can work with couples. I regularly have couples that I see for, you know, a year or two working on this issue, and then sometimes at the end they're ready, and other times they come to a decision they're not going to have kids. So really being on the same page is really important, because parenthood it's a lot. I think it would be easier to be a single parent than to be in a relationship with someone who's not on the same page with you.
Perfect. Thanks, Kim.
Yeah.
There's a lot of information we're going to be giving out today, and I just wanted to make you aware that you can go to fertilityplanet.com and find out the full bios of all of our panelists and find out more information about the programs that they offer as well. Thanks again.
Mm-hmm.
Andy, clients come to you and they're talking about family building options, and they're considering adoption, and they're also looking at surrogacy, or they may be looking at egg or sperm donation. In terms of the choices that they have and the legal implications of those choices, where do you begin?
Sure. Thank you, Kim. And if I can just segue off of something that Kim just said, because it resonated with me. She spoke about coming out. And a friend of mine just last week shared with me a very personal story that he's allowed me to talk about, how he came out to his parents in his mid-20s. And it took him a long time to feel comfortable enough to talk to his parents about coming out. And when he did, his parents were extremely supportive, everything that he expected of them. But then his mom began to cry. And he couldn't understand why his mom was crying after they were so encouraging and supportive of him. And she said, "For my whole life, I knew you would be a wonderful dad, and you're not going to get that opportunity." Well, about 20 years later, I was in the delivery room with him and his partner when their son was born. And it was one of the most moving experiences of my life, not just to witness the birth of their son, but to see this dream come true, and that his mother now will have the opportunity to see him become a dad. And it's important that we understand that while there has been a stigma, there have been barriers to same-sex couples and individuals moving forward with surrogacy and adoption. Those barriers are starting to come down. I think it was in 1997 that New Jersey was the first state to allow same-sex couples to adopt. Since then, 16 other states have come online to allow that. 10 states now allow same-sex or co-parent, second-parent adoptions. And there are a few more states that, depending upon the county that you live in, you can do a second-parent to co-parent adoption. So these barriers are coming down. I still believe gay marriage and same-sex parenting remains the last great civil rights issue that we have to deal with. But I'm happy to report that things are changing. And when intended parents come to me from the LGBT community, we have to look at a number of issues, unfortunately, that we don't have to look at with our married heterosexual clients. Among them, what state does their surrogate come from? Because surrogacy in the United States is not regulated at the federal level. It's left to each state to decide. We have some states that allow surrogacy, some that prohibit surrogacy, and the majority have taken no position at all. So the first thing we have to evaluate is whether or not their surrogate comes from a state that recognizes these arrangements. And unfortunately, there are a number of states, about a dozen states, that have legislation in place that regulate surrogacy, which for the most part is a positive step. But they're limited to married heterosexual couples, or limited to couples that are in a recognized marriage. So the first issue we have to evaluate is whether or not their surrogate comes from a state that allows surrogacy. Do they fall within the rules of that particular state, so that we know we can protect them? The second issue then we have to evaluate is how are we going to establish their parental rights? Whether you're dealing with two men or two women, one of the first questions I have to ask is whether or not they've considered having both of their names on the birth certificate. Now for me, and I'm a heterosexual male, but I believe it is essential that both of their names be on the birth certificate, not just for the intended parent's sake, but for the sake of the child. But there are a lot of countries that will not recognize two men on a birth certificate. There are states that will not recognize two men on the birth certificate. And there are clients of mine that are still uncomfortable with that concept. So the first thing we have to evaluate is it important to have two men on the birth certificate as father and father, or mother and mother? Because that will narrow the number of states that we can work in because there are really only a few states that will allow 2 men or 2 women to go on the original birth certificate without them having to do a second parent or co-parent adoption. And now let's assume they find a surrogate, a wonderful lady that is willing to carry their child, but she lives in a state that doesn't recognize 2 men on the original birth certificate. The next step in the analysis then is to determine whether they live, the intended parents live in a state that will allow a second parent or co-parent adoption. And assuming that they do, then we can proceed with that so that we can establish the equal parental rights of both dads or both moms. Then we run into the issue as to whether or not we can get a birth certificate with both of their names on it, because ultimately the state where the baby is born has the jurisdiction to issue the birth certificate. So even though, let's say, they go to New York and they can complete a second parent adoption in New York, that doesn't mean that a court or the Department of Vital Records in South Carolina will issue them a birth certificate with both dads and both moms' names on it. So that is an issue. And remember, it's something, that birth certificate, we can't minimize it. That's a document that that child will carry with them for the rest of their lives. And I think it's important that both of their parents be on that birth certificate. And then beyond that, we also have to deal with insurance issues, Ken. Insurance for the surrogates, and I know that there is an international audience listening to us today as well. And we also have to worry about insurance for the newborn baby. Typically, when you work with an agency, like the program that Kim owns, they're going to make sure that that surrogate has insurance, whether it's our underlying health insurance policy or specialized insurance issued by Lloyd's of London. But that's an issue particularly when, whether it's an LGBT couple or heterosexual couple does this, it's very important that they evaluate the underlying insurance that the surrogate may have, and then for international couples, that newborn coverage is available so that while their baby is in the United States, that child will be covered for any insurance or any medical claims that arise when they're here.
Do you understand the importance of having an attorney? It's, at best, a patchwork of laws throughout the United States surrounding all of the issues that Andy's been talking about. And I'm wondering if, as you look forward as an attorney in this particular area, are there things that you see on the horizon that are hopeful? Are there challenges that you see that we're still going to have to overcome in terms of the law and surrogacy, adoption, sperm, egg donation, all of those things?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen a lot of developments in the last several years. We've seen a number of states, most recently Florida, that struck down their ban on gay adoption, and I think we'll see more states as well beginning to embrace at least gay adoption. One of the things perhaps I'm most proud about was a couple of years ago I had the opportunity to work with Assemblyman Felipe Fuentes of the California Assembly, and I had the opportunity to draft, take the first cut at drafting legislation in California that would regulate the field of surrogacy. And we were able, within that new statute, which was signed into law by Governor Jerry Brown in November and became operative January 1st of this year, which has finally established equality in the definition of who's a parent. It's the only jurisdiction, California now is the only jurisdiction in the world where we do not discriminate based upon marital status or sexual orientation. So whether it's a same-sex couple, an individual within the LGBT community, or a single heterosexual couple, we no longer differentiate in how we finalize their parental rights. Everyone in California who proceeds with the surrogate arrangement is entitled to equal protection under the law, so that intended parents will have the right to have their names placed on the original birth certificate through the completion of a pre-birth order without the need to do a second parent adoption or a co-parent adoption, no need to go through social services and have home studies and demonstrating to the court that you're fit to be a parent when a 15-year-old could have a child without requiring a judge to sign off on their status as parental rights. So I think that this new legislation that we have in California will hopefully serve as a model for other states to follow. And over the next 5 to 10 years, I'm hopeful that other states will adopt this model and we can finally level the playing field so the LGBT community does not need to go through these extra steps in order to be declared equal as parents.
That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Engler, this whole process can be overwhelming when someone's first contemplating it, and I was hoping you could take us through some of the steps. What's the process like, just so that people have an opportunity to hear firsthand what they might be experiencing if they choose to proceed with creating their family like this.
Great, I'd be happy to. I have to just comment, hearing the legal aspects. It really does seem like a puzzle to build a family as a gay or lesbian man or woman. And I'm continually inspired by my patients, their commitment to building a family. And it all comes out of love, the love to have children, to build families. And that's why I feel passionate about helping my patients achieve that goal. So what I'd like to do is, we have a smaller group here, and give a little general talk on the process, and then I'm sure you'll all have questions, and then we can hone in on different areas. I think all individuals who are planning, interested in having children, building a family, need to start with a fertility evaluation. Whether you're a man or a woman, you need to see a reproductive specialist to get an assessment of what your fertility is, what your chances will be. For women, they need an evaluation of their ovarian reserve. Are your ovaries functioning normally for your age, or are they showing any signs of premature aging? And it can be as simple as a blood test. Blood tests on the second or third day of the menstrual cycle for estradiol and FSH, follicle-stimulating hormone, can reflect your ovarian reserve. Or a blood test for AMH, anti-Mullerian hormone. It's another good predictor of ovarian reserve, where your ovaries are at in their reproductive lifespan. A pelvic ultrasound of the ovaries also reflects the amount of activity in the ovaries, the number of follicles, to gain an assessment of how well your ovaries will respond during the process. Pelvic ultrasound evaluate the pelvic anatomy, the uterus, the ovaries, and perhaps an X-ray of the fallopian tubes called a hysterosalpingogram to test for the patency of the fallopian tubes, to see if the simpler procedures like insemination may be an effective way for you to build your family. For the men, a baseline semen analysis is important, because even if you are going to be using an egg donor and a surrogate and you will require IVF, it's good to find out early whether or not there's any sperm issues at all, because that IVF cycle may be three to 6 months down the road, so that gives us some time to treat any sperm issues, to try to improve the sperm quality, to ultimately make that cycle more effective. So everyone starts with a fertility evaluation, and then for lesbian couples, we usually start, in terms of fertility treatment, start with something very simple, like a natural cycle insemination. So we monitor for ovulation, and using the designated donor sperm, thaw and place the sperm in the upper uterine cavity at the appropriate time in the cycle, which is right around the time of ovulation. And this will give us a pregnancy rate per cycle that depends primarily on the age of the woman ovulating. And in general, as you get older, the egg quality decreases a little bit, pregnancy rates decrease, and miscarriage rates increase. Some women prefer to go directly to IVF, in vitro fertilization. In vitro fertilization does provide higher pregnancy rates per cycle. For example, a 30-year-old woman doing an insemination may have a 15% pregnancy rate per cycle with an insemination. IVF can provide her, a 65% pregnancy rate per cycle. Some lesbian couples prefer to undergo reciprocal IVF, where one partner contributes the eggs for the IVF cycle, and her partner carries the pregnancy. So the one partner does IVF, we stimulate her ovaries to make multiple eggs. Eggs are retrieved, fertilized to create embryos. The embryos are cultured for 3 to 5 days to allow us to select the highest quality embryos to transfer. And so while her partner is taking medication to stimulate her ovaries, the other partner is on hormones to make her uterine lining receptive for that embryo transfer. So it's a wonderful option. For gay men, we use primarily egg donation and surrogacy. In this process, an egg donor is selected. Let's go to the first slide. This is a nice sort of summary slide of the egg donor surrogacy process. So the intended parents do their initial consultation with either a reproductive endocrinologist or a surrogacy agency to undergo their medical screening and to hear about the process. the surrogacy agency, and we're fortunate to have in Southern California some of the world's best surrogacy agencies in the world, I think. The surrogacy agencies do conduct the initial recruitment and social screening of the surrogate mothers. The surrogacy agency will match the intended parents with a surrogate candidate, and the surrogate candidate then comes to the reproductive endocrinologist for medical screening. So the surrogate mothers are these amazing women between the ages of approximately 20 and 40 with history of at least one normal pregnancy and delivery. And they're very committed to this process of helping other individuals and couples to have children and to build families. And we carefully review their past medical obstetrical history to make sure there's nothing about that past history that would complicate this planned pregnancy in any way, because we're trying to provide the optimal environment for this developing baby. So the surrogate mother's medically cleared. The intended parents will then select the egg donor. And the egg donor may be a known egg donor. She may be a family friend or relative, or they may find the egg donor from an egg donor agency that, like the surrogacy agency, does the initial recruitment and screening of donor candidates. The egg donor, once selected, completes medical screening. She's screened medically, genetically, psychologically to make sure she's a suitable candidate. Once everyone has been medically cleared, contracts are signed. At that point, we're ready to begin the treatment process. And in the treatment process, we're essentially doing in vitro fertilization on the egg donor. So we're stimulating her ovaries to make multiple eggs. The eggs are retrieved. And I think the next slide is a nice diagram for those of you who are not familiar with in vitro fertilization of the IVF process. The ovaries are stimulated to make multiple eggs. At the appropriate time, the eggs are retrieved through a simple outpatient surgical procedure. They are inseminated in vitro to create embryos. The embryos are then cultured for 3 to 5 days to allow selection of the best embryo for transfer. And the culturing phase is very important because that's how we optimize the chance for pregnancy. So over each 24-hour period in a Petri dish, a normal human embryo should continually divide and develop. So after 3 days in culture, ideally should have 6 to 8 cells. By day 5, it develops into a sphere of about 100 cells, and that's called a blastocyst. So a blastocyst is a stage at which an embryo is going to implant into the uterine lining to initiate the pregnancy. Now, not all eggs, not all embryos will become blastocysts, so the culturing in the laboratory allows us to select out those 1 or 2 embryos that have the highest chance of initiating a pregnancy. Even in a young woman in her 20s, 30 to 40% of those eggs and embryos may be chromosomally abnormal and not capable of initiating a pregnancy. And the one impact of age is that a greater percentage of those embryos will be chromosomally abnormal and not capable of initiating a pregnancy.
And Dr. can you just address the biological clock as long as
Sure.
you've introduced that,
Sure.
talk about that a little more fully?
We talked a little bit about assessing ovarian reserve by the baseline blood test for follicle-stimulating hormone on the 3rd day of the cycle, or the AMH, anti-Mullerian hormone. So they reflect ovarian reserve. What does that mean? A woman is born with all the eggs she'll have in her lifetime, and from birth, they begin to go away. At birth, you have 1 or 2 million eggs. By menarche, it's down to about 300,000. And each month, the ovaries recruit a group of eggs, select out 1 to ovulate, and the other ones fade away. So some women will go through that transition, that decay of eggs more rapidly. And that's where the ovarian reserve testing is helpful. An elevated FSH suggests your ovaries are acting older than your age, or a low AMH means the same thing. There's a decreased number of eggs remaining.
Thank you.
And just in general, as age increases, the chance of that egg being chromosomally abnormal increases. And that's why pregnancy rates fall off. and miscarriage rates increase with advancing age. Going back to our slide over there, on the middle of the slide to the right are the pictures of two blastocysts. When we're doing egg donation and surrogacy, our decision is whether to transfer 1 or 2 day 5 embryos, 1 or 2 blastocysts. And that decision depends in part on how intended parent feels about the possibility of twins. If you want to minimize twins, I always recommend transferring a single blastocyst because pregnancy rates today are higher than ever before. We're all doing better jobs at what we're doing than ever before. So if we transfer 2 day 5 embryos from a donor egg, we can have 30 to 40% twinning rates. If we transfer 1, we essentially eliminate that. There's a 1 to 2% chance of an embryo splitting. We see many couples who like the idea of twins. We always counsel those intended parents about the potential risks of a twin pregnancy poses. Main risk being preterm labor and delivery, which puts the babies at risk. And in general, all of the obstetrical complications of pregnancy occur more frequently in a twin pregnancy. What haven't we covered?
And there's also regarding elective single embryo transfer and the risk of twins, there's also greater risk to the surrogate
Mother, the higher risk of high blood pressure in pregnancy, gestational diabetes in pregnancy with a twin pregnancy, greater chance that she's going to be asked to be home at bed rest early in the pregnancy, which means she can't work and take care of her kids. So I see more and more intended parents electing for a single embryo transfer with a day 5 blastocyst. And that means we just freeze more embryos because my goal for this egg donor cycle is to have enough eggs and embryos to have a high quality embryo to transfer and to have multiple embryos to freeze. So if we don't achieve a pregnancy, the surrogate or the recipient stops their hormones, gets their periods, and we can go right into a frozen embryo transfer. We think we're really good at selecting the best embryo for transfer, but there's many cases where we do not achieve a pregnancy and then get a pregnancy from the frozen. So we still cannot look at an embryo and tell which ones are capable of initiating the pregnancy. So if we're transferring just one, there's more to freeze, and there's more potential.
Great.
Can we go to the next slide? Patients often ask me, how do I select a good egg donor? In general, the egg donors are women between the ages of 20 and 28. I prefer that they have regular menstrual cycles. They should have a normal ovarian reserve testing for FSH and AMH, antral follicle count. If we look at the ovaries on the second, third day of the period, we can see how many follicles, how many eggs have been recruited for that cycle. In a young egg donor who is going to respond well to medication, we should see an antral follicle count of greater than 15. That's total between the 2 ovaries. And lastly, proven cycle performance. If an egg donor has cycled before, we can receive information on how many eggs she produced, how many embryos were created, was there a pregnancy, and that's very useful supporting information. Next slide, please. Factors affecting the success rates in these treatment cycles include the egg and sperm quality, the cycle monitoring. It's important that we monitor carefully both how the ovaries respond, when's the best time to remove the eggs. If we remove the eggs too early, they'll be immature, they won't fertilize. If we remove them too late, we can overcook them and potentially decrease their quality and pregnancy potential. The surrogate mother needs to be monitored carefully as well to make sure she has a normally developing uterine lining, to make sure that's the best possible environment in which to put our embryos. The embryo transfer quality. Most programs today do embryo transfers under ultrasound guidance, so we can very carefully see where the tip of the catheter is going and where those embryos are being placed. 10 years ago, the standard of care was not to do it under ultrasound guidance, and we would just place and we would do it by feel. So ultrasound gives us higher sensitivity and specificity of where those embryos are going. And lastly, I put down body mass index of the surrogate, and that's factors into the medical screening of the surrogate mother. Next slide. Secrets to success. Someone asked me once. I think experience matters. You know, when you're looking for agencies, clinics to work with, you want programs that have been around for a long time, that have experience working with egg donors and surrogates, and you want to work with a program that's very comfortable working with you as a gay man or lesbian woman. This is a very important chapter in your life, and you want to be surrounded by a team of professionals that will help support you through this process. I have egg donor selections important, the IVF lab experience. You want to work with a program, again, that has good success rates and also has experience with the freezing and thawing of embryos for those extra embryos that you will hopefully save for, you know, baby number 2 or 3. And a supportive team of professionals, I think, can help ensure an optimal success rate. Next slide. And this is just to give you some idea of what those pregnancy rates are. I just summarize our data for the last several years. From 189 embryo transfers of egg donor and surrogates, we had a pregnancy rate per cycle of 80%, with an ongoing pregnancy rate per cycle of 69%. So even with egg donor and surrogacy cases, occasionally there's a miscarriage. On a rare occasion, there may be an ectopic pregnancy. But in general, these are very high success rates in the field of reproductive medicine, because they're really the best conditions to initiate a pregnancy, because we have a young egg donor and we're putting these embryos into a proven uterine environment, into the surrogate mother who's had no fertility issues of her own. Next slide, please. And hopefully this is our happy ending with a cute little baby.
Thank you, Dr. Ring. We'd like to take questions from the audience now. We have someone with a microphone, so if you have a question, if you'd raise your hand, we'll make sure a microphone makes it over to you. The lady right here in the white. If you hold on for the microphone, please. Thank you.
I think you guys, what's the term mentioned, partner-to-partner IVF? What's the legal status of the two parents in that situation?
For partner-partner IVF?
Yes.
It depends what state you live in.
We'll start with California.
Okay, if you start in California, you will have the right at the time of delivery to simply place your partner's name on the birth certificate as the other parent. The traditional birth certificate worksheet that you'll have will say mother parent and father parent. So you'd simply, mother, the woman who delivered the child, will be in the first box, and the second box will be your partner. You cross out father, you circle parent. They will issue a birth certificate that will have mother and parent on it, and then you can get an amended birth certificate that will say mother and mother from the state of California.
Does that answer the question? Terrific. There's a gentleman over here, and then we'll go over this side.
Hi, for Kim, I have a question. This is my partner, and this is my potential co-parent, but I originally was looking for a surrogate and then decided to go the co-parenting route, or I want the woman involved in some aspect. I think there's nothing more important than a mother role and a father role, but not the standard, obviously traditional with this. Do you get many single lesbians or lesbian couples that come to you looking for advice on co-parenting or finding a male donor partner that's interested in being a co-parent? I'd be interested in finding more women also, as I've discussed with Jesse, and having several children with the village mentality of, you know, being able to help each other and raise children. So I'm just wondering how many women you have that come to you for advice or potentially looking for a donor or co-parent.
That's a really good question. Actually, less women, more men who are coming interested in co-parenting. I mean, it's obvious women have an easier route medically and financially. Emotionally, it's the same, but in those other two ways, it's much easier. So more often, men are looking to co-parent rather than do a surrogacy or adopt. But the one thing I'll just say, taking that kind of one step further, is co-parenting is a terrific option. What's important in co-parenting is that you do a lot of work up front so that everyone is really on the same page, both legally and psychologically. There is nothing like holding your baby, and it does change people. And if you don't codify and legally codify what you're doing and who the parents are and how it's set up, it's risky. I have had many cases, I'm sure you have as well, legally, of the best of intentioned people. Almost every case that goes bad legally is a case where people used a known donor or surrogate or co-parent. The people who use anonymous donor surrogates or adopt, those cases don't go bad legally. Almost every case that I've had to, that's been referred to me by attorneys or by courts are family members or friends who, with the best of intentions, go into this. But until you've had a child, you don't really know what it is to have a child. So it's just, it's a completely valid choice. Just have front load it with conversations. So you guys are really, really clear. Who are the legal parents? Who are the decision makers? Maybe it's all of you. It can't be all three of you, right? Can't be all three of them?
No, not recommended.
Right, legally. So how do you handle that? Who gets to say, where does the baby live? Who's financially responsible? All that stuff up front. And so don't neglect a professional. And that doesn't just go for co-parenting, but even if you're doing donor insemination, with your cousin or your friend or your neighbor, a lot of people think this is going to be much more yummy and lovey and crunchy. We're going to do it at home. It's actually, you have no legal protection at all if you do it at home, at all. And there's a case, case right now where they did it at home, and and the court just awarded, what they declared that the sperm donor, who was anonymous but answered an ad on the internet, is legally responsible for the child.
Because it was an at-home insemination and didn't go through a physician.
They did it at home, right? So you should not neglect what I recommend, and I think we've all said this at different kind of layers in here, is consult with professionals and then make your choice. And really your team does need to include medical, legal, psychological, because you don't really know what the laws are. You don't know you're breaking them. You don't know that if you do a home insemination with your friend who's a nurse and the sperm is, in the other room, that you're actually not protected, and neither is the donor. But you would have no way of knowing that. So do the legwork up front.
Thanks. Over here, please.
Hi, thank you for being up there. I guess I have a follow-up question as far as putting our names on the birth certificate, my wife being the mother and then I being the partner. Would I have to then take another step in adopting?
No, at least not under California.
As far as rights?
Well, with respect to the birth certificate, the hospital will generally simply comply with whatever instructions are given to them, usually by the birth parent. So your wife can put your name on the birth certificate. Nevertheless, I would recommend, in a situation where you're not working with the surrogate, and assisted reproduction, at least third-party reproduction is not involved, that you do consider either a second parent adoption, or you can get a judgment of maternity simply to establish your co-parenting rights. With respect to surrogacy now, that's not necessary because it's all handled as part of the pre-birth judgment process. But in a situation where you work with a sperm donor, as an example, you can get the birth certificate, but the birth certificate is not legally dispositive as to who the parent is, certainly with respect to custody and then support later on. So to do that judgment of maternity, or simply to go into court, get a declaratory judgment establishing you as the co-parent, or you can also do a second parent adoption, that procedure would be available and recommended.
And the other thing about these legal procedures is lawyers in this field, like Andy, do them every day, all the time. So it's really, it's quite easy in California.
It's all stipulated. I mean, it's merely submitting the paperwork to the court, and generally within a couple of weeks it's stamped, processed, and sent back to you, and it's over with.
Thank you. We have a question towards the back of the room, please.
Sorry to piggyback off that again. So is that reciprocal if you move to another state?
No, No, and that's part of the issue that we have to deal with. There are some states that will recognize same-sex couples, others that prohibit it, and then there's no obligation to give full faith and credit. So even in California, where we get a judgment of maternity, judgment of paternity, or a judgment of maternity and paternity, doesn't necessarily mean whatever state that couple returns home to will recognize it. So even though you have a birth certificate that says you're both the moms or both the dads, it doesn't mean that you're automatically entitled to whatever benefits the state that you reside in. You won't necessarily be entitled to those benefits because they don't have to accept that California judgment.
Another question up here? Thank you.
Just rolling on the same question here. Okay, what about if you do the second parent adoption in California and then you move out of state? Do you
Same
have
issue.
to do a second parent adoption in the other state?
If you live in a different state and your state allows second parent adoptions, then the recommendation is you just do the second parent adoption in the state you reside in. The problem is for international couples in particular, which right now makes up about 50% of my practice, because in most countries overseas you can't do this. So they come to the United States, and part of the problem is you have to do it in a state that recognizes these arrangements to begin with. So if you live in a state where you can do a second parent or co-parent adoption, there's no reason to come to California. You would just simply do it in the state that you reside in. The people from out of state that come to California to work with the surrogate are generally coming from a state where this is not permitted. And that adds that extra layer of difficulty because we don't know whether or not they will recognize that California judgment. And again, there is no federal authority that requires a state to give full faith and credit to, let's say, a California judgment of maternity or paternity, because that state has the right to have their own rules and regulations as to who is a parent.
So
Now,
you're
if the Supreme Court comes on the side of declaring DOMA unconstitutional, that could change, and it probably will change, because what that would mean is that other states would have to recognize legal marriage, and if you're legally married, it's a different story.
That's right.
In terms of your parental rights.
Did you have a follow-on?
I'm sorry, so if you're living in California and you do second parent adoption, and then at some point you need to move to a different state, and you have children at that point, when you're moving to that state, that second parent adoption is no longer valid? Or
It may not be, that's right. It may not be recognized, and then you're subject to whatever, inheritance would be an issue that would come up. When the non-biological partner passes away, under the state laws, the inheritance may not automatically pass to that child because that child may not be recognized as the offspring of that non-biological parent. Now, you can work around that by having, an estate plan in place and wills and trusts to make sure that, your estate would pass to that child. But that's one of the, sort of day-to-day concerns that a lot of LGBT couples have, is that when they move to a state that doesn't have laws as friendly as they are here in California, you may not be entitled to certain benefits, and then things like dying without a will and testate may mean that your child doesn't inherit.
Thanks, Sam. Jennifer, some questions from Twitter and Facebook.
Yeah, we have quite a few. One is asking about the planning aspect, saying it sounds possibly prohibitively expensive to even consider having children. So how does one plan, and how to put more emphasis on this to younger folks in the community so that they can plan financially for it?
I'd like to address the
Yeah,
financial
I'm happy to
aspect.
talk about that. It is expensive. There are, everything from co-parenting to surrogacy, and probably gradient steps in between. Things do cost money. There are a number of things that those of us in the profession are doing to try to keep the costs low and make this doable for people. Almost all of us, I know all three of us, and many of us that aren't here, do pro bono work. We give it away for free a lot. We also finance, and what that really means is instead of paying for everything all at once, you're able to pay monthly or pay over time to make it doable. There are banks that are loaning money for fertility treatments, and also, depending on your situation, your insurance may cover, your medical insurance may cover some aspect of the process. So, there are different things that are in place to try to make it more doable. Unfortunately, in the case of surrogacy, what costs so much are all of the pieces of the puzzle, and they're all hard costs. You know, there's the actual medical fees, then the medicine, and the legal fees, and the insurance, and the surrogate's fees, and the egg donor fees, and so all of these things are real. Travel. So there's not a lot that can be shaved. I think all of us are very responsible about keeping the costs as low as we can, but we recognize it's an expensive journey. Donor insemination is much less expensive, and adoption, depending on if it's private, can be more expensive, or the public through foster care could be free.
Thanks. We're going to try to get a few more questions in.
So there's so many. Let's see. When using a fertility clinic, what questions should an LGBT couple ask?
I think it's important to ask how many LGBT couples and individuals they've treated, and will I feel comfortable going as a patient in your clinic? You should spend time, make a visit, meet your doctor, meet the nurses, and get a sense of how welcoming they are to you. There are some parts of this country where patients are not welcome into their clinic, so I think that's important research to do. Find out how many, if you need a surrogate, how many surrogacy cycles do you do a year? Do you do 10 or do you do 100? Third-party reproduction, meaning egg donation surrogacy, requires a lot of details being summarized. Everyone undergoes FDA screening. We haven't really talked about that, but our government requires for the egg provider, the sperm provider, what infectious disease tests need to be ordered, what assays they can be run on, when they need to be run on, and someone has to summarize all this data, or else we can't transfer that embryos into that surrogate. It takes a team of support staff to keep these cycles organized and running smoothly. You don't want to be at the time ready for the embryo transfer and for someone to tell you, oh, we forgot to run this test, we can't put your embryos into the surrogate.
Jennifer, thank you. Just a quick resource. If people check out the AFA's website, we have an LGBT handbook that summarizes those questions, the questions that Dr. Ringler just talked about, and many more. I have several copies in hard copy today that you're welcome to take, but they're also online, and you can see the entire resource there.
So one question I'm wondering if it's covered there. It's come in a few different ways, but basically asking what protections there are to make sure people aren't related to one another, like do they have siblings in an area, things like that. Related to...
I'm having a hard time understanding. If you could speak up a little, please.
So sorry. People asking in different ways how we ensure that people don't sort of find a mate that could be a genetic sibling or something close to that, with how early we are and protections. Are protections in place for that sort of thing? Is that a consideration that people should make, or is there anything that they should do to try to help prevent their children from having any kind of genetic issues later on?
For anonymous egg donation, there's professional guidelines as to how many cycles an egg donor can donate. The American Society for Reproductive Medicine recommends limiting the number of donations to 6, just to help minimize the risk of having too many offspring in one geographic region who were conceived using an anonymous egg donor.
Most sperm banks have a limit as well to the number of families they'll let any one donor donate to in a geographic area. Wearing my psychologist hat for a moment, the best way to avoid those issues is honesty with your children. So your children should know that they were conceived through a donor, and that's part of who they are, and it's part of their identity. So they have that information.
Lovely. We have so many more. I'll leave it to you, Ken, because we only have very little time left.
Right. There are a lot more questions to be answered. As you can see, this topic is extraordinarily complex. I would invite you to continue the conversation on Twitter at #FPS13, FPS13. And again, if you go to fertilityplanet.com, you can contact any one of us, see our bios, see the programs that we run or participate in, and we're there to answer more questions for you. I really want to thank EMD Serono, who's a tremendous supporter of the American Fertility Association, who sponsored today's panel. As I said at the beginning, corporations really can make a big difference in how we get information out, and they've made a huge difference for us. I want to thank Ustream for recording all of these programs and let you know that starting on Monday the 14th, all of these programs will be available on demand, again at fertilityplanet.com. Thank you very much to Dr. Guy Ringler. Thank you to Dr. Kim Bergman. Thank you to Attorney Andy Vorsimer. And thanks to all of you for being here today. We'll be available for a few minutes afterwards. If you have any questions, you're all welcome to come up. Thanks again.